On the morning of November 29, 1970, in a remote valley near Bergen, Norway, a place locals called Death Valley for its grim history of suicides and fatal accidents, a father and his two young daughters stumbled upon the charred remains of a woman lying among the rocks. Her body partially burned, her face destroyed beyond recognition, her arms frozen in a boxer-like pose, surrounded by carefully arranged belongings, from which every single identifying label had been meticulously removed. And in the 54 years since that terrible discovery, despite the efforts of police across multiple continents, the resources of Interpol, the determination of journalists and amateur sleuths, and the most advanced forensic technology the 21st century can offer, no one has been able to answer the most basic question of all: who was she? Before we dive in, leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow we uncover another case that will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Norway in 1970 was a country on the front lines of an invisible war. The Cold War had divided Europe into armed camps, and Norway, a NATO member sharing a border with the Soviet Union, occupied a position of strategic importance that belied its small population and peaceful reputation. Soviet submarines prowled the Norwegian coast. Intelligence operatives from both east and west used the country as a chessboard for their clandestine games. And in the city of Bergen, on the southwestern coast, a major naval base served as a crucial node in the Western Alliance's defensive network. To understand why the case of the Isdal Woman has captivated investigators and armchair detectives for over 5 decades, you first have to understand the world in which she moved. A world of shadows and secrets, of coded messages and false identities, where the wrong word to the wrong person could mean death, and where entire lives could be fabricated and then erased without a trace. The Cold War was not cold at all. It was a furnace of espionage, sabotage, assassination, and covert operations that claimed thousands of lives across multiple continents. While the superpowers avoided direct military confrontation, they waged relentless secret warfare through their intelligence agencies. The CIA and KGB were the most famous players, but dozens of other services, British MI6, Israeli Mossad, East German Stasi, French SDECE, and many others, operated in the shadows, recruiting agents, running operations, and occasionally eliminating those who became liabilities. Norway occupied a unique position in this invisible conflict. As a NATO member sharing a long Arctic border with the Soviet Union, it was strategically vital to the Western Alliance. The Norwegian coast provided access to the North Atlantic, and Soviet submarines stationed on the Kola Peninsula had to pass through Norwegian waters to reach the open ocean. Both superpowers maintained extensive intelligence networks in the country, monitoring military installations, tracking submarine movements, and gathering information on each other's capabilities. Bergen, Norway's second-largest city, was particularly important from an intelligence perspective. The city housed a major naval base and was home to various military installations. In 1970, Norwegian defense contractors were developing the Penguin missile, a new anti-ship weapon that represented a significant technological advance. The tests were conducted in secret, but secrets have a way of leaking, and both Eastern and Western intelligence services would have been extremely interested in any information about the new weapon system. It was into this world of secrets and shadows that an unknown woman arrived in 1970, traveling under false names, carrying fake passports, speaking multiple languages, and behaving in ways that would later lead investigators to wonder if she had been part of that invisible war and whether her death was its consequence. The year 1970 was a particularly tense time in the Cold War. The Prague Spring of 1968 had been crushed by Soviet tanks, demonstrating Moscow's willingness to use force to maintain control of its satellite states. The Vietnam War was raging, with American forces bogged down in a conflict that seemed to have no end. Palestinian terrorists were launching increasingly bold attacks on Israeli and Western targets, including the dramatic hijacking of multiple aircraft in September 1970. The world seemed balanced on a knife's edge, and nowhere more so than in the shadowy realm of international espionage. Against this backdrop, a woman whose name we still do not know traveled through Norway, staying in hotels under assumed identities, speaking multiple languages, wearing disguises, and carrying coded notes that recorded her movements. She interacted with people, hotel staff, shopkeepers, perhaps intelligence contacts, who would remember her decades later. She ate in restaurants, walked city streets, and may have observed military installations. And then, in late November 1970, she disappeared into a remote valley and died. Was she a spy? A courier? A surveillance operative? A double agent? A defector? Or was she something else entirely? A woman fleeing from a dangerous past, trying to disappear, running from something or someone we cannot identify. These questions have haunted investigators for 54 years. Bergen is Norway's second-largest city, a place of stunning natural beauty, where colorful wooden houses cluster along the waterfront, and 7 mountains rise dramatically from the surrounding landscape. The city has been a major trading center since the Middle Ages, when it served as the northernmost outpost of the Hanseatic League. Today, it is known for its UNESCO World Heritage-listed Bergen district, its vibrant cultural scene, and the spectacular fjords that draw tourists from around the world. But Bergen also has a darker side. The city's weather is notoriously harsh, with rain falling more than 200 days per year. The mountains that surround it can be treacherous, with sudden fog, steep terrain, and conditions that have claimed many lives over the centuries. And in the valleys above the city, there are places that have earned grim nicknames, places where the desperate have gone to end their lives, where hikers have lost their way and never returned. Ulriken is the highest of the 7 mountains that surround Bergen, rising to 643 meters above sea level. On its northern face lies a remote valley known as Isdalen, Norwegian for Ice Valley. The name is fitting. The terrain is rocky and barren, with scree slopes and boulders scattered across a landscape that seems inhospitable to human life. In winter, ice and snow make the area particularly treacherous. Even in the milder months, the valley is not a place where casual hikers venture. The locals had another name for Isdalen, Dødsdalen, which translates to Death Valley. The nickname had been earned over centuries, dating back to the Middle Ages, when the area gained a reputation as a place where the suicidal came to end their lives, and where hikers met fatal accidents on the treacherous terrain. It was a place of bad omens, a place that locals preferred to avoid. On that Sunday morning in late November 1970, a man and his 2 young daughters, one 12 years old, the other younger, set out for a hike in the foothills of Ulriken. They were locals who knew the mountains, who understood the risks of hiking in this terrain, who had probably passed through Isdalen before without incident. It was a cold day, the kind of late autumn morning when the mountains seem to brood under low gray skies, when the air carries the promise of the long Scandinavian winter to come. The family followed a path that wound up the scree slope above Isdalen, climbing into terrain that few people ever visited. The rocks were treacherous, the footing uncertain, and as they climbed higher, they moved farther from the well-traveled trails. This was not a Sunday stroll. It was a challenging hike through wild country, the kind of excursion that builds character and creates memories. Though the memories this family would carry away from the mountain would be of a different kind entirely. The 12-year-old girl noticed it first. A strange smell, acrid and unmistakable, drifting through the cold mountain air. It was the smell of burning, but not the pleasant scent of a campfire or a fireplace. This was something different, something wrong. Following the scent, she pushed ahead of her father and sister, making her way toward a small clearing among the rocks. And there, in that remote place where few people ever came, she saw something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. A woman lay on her back among the boulders, her body positioned with her head pointing downhill in what investigators would later describe as an upside-down posture. The front of her body was badly burned, her face destroyed beyond recognition, her torso charred and blackened, the features that had once identified her as a unique individual now obliterated by flame. But strangely, inexplicably, her back remained largely untouched by the fire. It was as if she had burned from the front while lying on her back, the flames consuming her face and chest while the ground beneath her protected her from complete immolation. Her arms were raised and curled in what forensic experts call the pugilistic pose, a position that occurs when intense heat causes the muscles to contract, drawing the limbs inward as if the body is trying to protect itself. It is a sign that the victim was alive when the fire started, that the muscles were still capable of responding to the heat that was destroying them. The Isdal woman had not been dead when the flames began to consume her. The girl screamed. Her father rushed to her side, saw what she had found, and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. This was not something a child should see. This was not something anyone should see. He gathered his daughters, shielding them from the sight as best he could, and began the long journey back to civilization. In 1970, there were no mobile phones, no way to call for help from the mountainside. The walk back to town, circling around the lake called Svartediket, must have seemed endless. 3 people carrying the weight of what they had seen, knowing they would have to report it, knowing their lives had been touched by something terrible. The father would have to find words to explain to the authorities what they had discovered. The daughters would have to carry the memory of that burned body, that acrid smell, that moment of horror in the mountain silence. They could not have known that they had stumbled upon one of the most enduring mysteries in European criminal history. They could not have known that the woman in the valley would become famous around the world, that her case would be investigated for decades, that podcasts and documentaries and books would be devoted to unraveling her identity. They knew only that they had found something terrible, and that they needed to tell someone. When police arrived at the scene, they found themselves confronting a puzzle unlike anything they had encountered before. The Bergen police had dealt with suicides in this area before. Isdalen had a grim reputation for such deaths, but those cases had been relatively straightforward. This was different. From the moment they first laid eyes on the scene, experienced officers sensed something deeply wrong. The woman's body lay among the rocks exactly as the family had described it, burned beyond recognition on the front, relatively preserved on the back, arms raised in that terrible pugilistic pose that indicated she had been alive when the flames began their work. The contrast was stark and disturbing. The front of her body blackened and charred, her face destroyed beyond any hope of visual identification, while her back remained almost untouched, as if the fire had burned from only one direction. But it was the objects scattered around her that truly suggested this was no ordinary death. They were arranged in what one investigator would later describe as an almost ceremonial positioning. Too deliberate to be accidental, too careful to be the random scatter of someone's final moments. Near the corpse lay a matchbox, presumably used to start the fire. A watch set to exactly 10:10 that appeared never to have been used, its hands frozen in that precise position, as if marking a significant time, perhaps a rendezvous that was never kept, perhaps a message that investigators were never able to decode. A ring and 2 earrings, removed from the body and set aside rather than worn. A purse, its contents missing or scattered. An umbrella, incongruous in this remote location. Nylon stockings carefully placed. A fur hat bearing traces of petrol, likely used as kindling. A woolen jumper, partially burned. Rubber boots, the kind used for hiking in wet terrain. A scarf. 2 plastic water bottles that smelled unmistakably of accelerant, the fuel for the fire that had consumed her. A nearly destroyed plastic passport holder, suggesting she had once carried identification that was now obliterated. An empty bottle of liqueur, and 12 sleeping pills scattered on the ground near her body. Additional pills beyond the massive quantity already in her stomach. The arrangement was too precise to be accidental. Someone, whether the woman herself or another person, had positioned these objects around the body with care, perhaps according to some ritual or symbolic logic that investigators could not discern. But it was what they didn't find that made the investigators' blood run cold. Every label had been removed from the woman's clothing, not torn off in haste, but carefully, methodically cut away with scissors or a blade. The labels on the plastic bottles had been scraped off with something sharp. Any mark that might have identified where her belongings came from, where she had shopped, where she had traveled, all of it had been erased with surgical precision. This was not panic. This was planning. This was the work of someone who understood exactly what investigators would look for and had systematically eliminated every lead before it could be found. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure this woman could not be identified. Police lawyer Carl Halvor Aas was among the first officials to reach the scene. Decades later, speaking to journalists investigating the case, he would recall the experience vividly. The first thing we notice is the stench. I remember we were walking, and sometimes climbing, up the ski slope. As we hurry along, I'm wondering where we are heading for, because it all seems so steep and impassable. This is no hiking trail, that's for sure. The climb to the scene was arduous, through loose rocks and dense undergrowth, up steep terrain that offered no easy path. Why would anyone choose to die here? Why would anyone bring a body here? The remoteness of the location suggested someone who wanted to remain undiscovered for as long as possible, or someone who had been brought here against their will, to a place where screams would go unheard and witnesses would be unlikely. When they reached the body, the officers began tossing around theories. Perhaps the woman had fallen into a campfire and launched herself backward in a panic. But there was no evidence of any campfire. No cleared ground, no ring of stones, no charred wood, nothing to suggest how the flames had started except for the traces of petrol on her hat and clothing. This was no accident. This was deliberate burning, carefully prepared with accelerant, carried out in a location where the flames would be visible to no one. The officers photographed everything, their breath visible in the cold mountain air as they worked methodically through the scene. Every object was documented, every position recorded. Even in 1970, with forensic techniques primitive by today's standards, the Bergen police understood the importance of preserving evidence. They could not have known then how many decades this case would haunt them, how many investigators would study these photographs, searching for clues that might finally solve the mystery. The body was transported to the Gods Institute in Bergen for autopsy, where it was assigned case number 13470. The unknown woman would come to be known as the Isdal Woman, a name that would become synonymous with one of the most baffling cold cases in European history. The autopsy revealed crucial information about both the woman's life and her death. She was approximately 164 centimeters tall, about 5 feet 4 inches, with dark brown hair that had been worn in a ponytail. Her eyes were small and brown. Based on the condition of her body and various physical markers, investigators initially estimated her age at somewhere between 25 and 40 years old, though later forensic analysis would revise this estimate upward, suggesting she was closer to 40 when she died. The cause of death was determined to be a combination of two factors: incapacitation by phenobarbital and carbon monoxide poisoning. Analysis of her blood and stomach contents revealed that she had consumed between 50 and 70 Phenomal brand sleeping pills, a staggering quantity. The pills appeared to have been taken in 2 or 3 batches, with the first dose ingested several hours before her death. But here was the crucial detail. The concentration of phenobarbital in her blood at the time of death was approximately 4.5 milligrams per 100 milliliters. This was sublethal, enough to make her drowsy and disoriented, but not enough on its own to kill her. Had there been no fire, the full quantity of pills she had ingested would eventually have been absorbed into her bloodstream and proven fatal. But that's not what killed her. What killed her was the fire. Soot particles were found in her lungs and respiratory tract, providing incontrovertible evidence that the Isdal woman was still breathing when she burned. She was alive when the flames consumed her body. The official cause of death was listed as a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning from the fire and the effects of the sleeping pills. There was another detail that investigators found troubling: bruising on her neck, consistent with either a fall or a blow. Had someone struck her? Had she been in a struggle? Or had she simply fallen in her drugged state? The autopsy could not provide a definitive answer. One more finding would prove significant in the years to come. The woman's teeth showed extensive dental work featuring gold fillings, a style of dentistry that was atypical for Norway and suggested she had received dental care elsewhere, possibly in Eastern Europe, Central Europe, or even further abroad. Her teeth and jawbone were removed and preserved as evidence, a decision that would eventually allow 21st century scientists to extract crucial information about her origins. The autopsy also determined that the woman had never been pregnant and had never given birth. Beyond that, she appeared to have been in good health before her death. Whatever had brought her to that remote valley, it was not illness or physical deterioration. And then there was the matter of the pills themselves. The phenomal sleeping pills found in her system were pink, a variety that was sold only in England at the time. The Norwegian version of the same medication was white. This seemingly minor detail suggested that the woman had been to England, or had obtained the pills from someone who had been there. It was another thread in a tapestry that was growing more complex by the hour. 3 days after the body was discovered, investigators caught their first significant break. 2 large suitcases were found at the Bergen railway station's left luggage department. The rental period on the storage locker had expired, and when staff opened it, they found luggage that would prove to be connected to the dead woman in the valley. The connection was established through a fingerprint found on a pair of sunglasses inside one of the suitcases. The print matched fingerprints taken from the corpse. Finally, police had concrete evidence to work with: physical items that had belonged to the mysterious woman. But the suitcases raised as many questions as they answered, and provided investigators with some of the most tantalizing clues in the entire case. Like the items found at the crime scene, everything in the suitcases had been stripped of identifying information. Labels had been removed from clothing, not torn off hastily, but carefully cut with scissors or a blade, leaving no remnants that might identify the manufacturer or the store where items were purchased. The name had been scratched off a tube of eczema cream with something sharp, obliterating the prescription information that might have led investigators to a pharmacy and a patient record. Even the manufacturer's marks on everyday objects had been erased. Whoever this woman was, she had been determined to leave no trace, a systematic effort that must have taken considerable time and attention. This level of operational security is not something ordinary people think about. Most of us never consider the identifying information embedded in our possessions, the labels on our clothes, the brand names on our cosmetics, the receipts in our wallets, the serial numbers on our electronics. We accumulate these traces without thinking, leaving a trail of evidence that could be used to reconstruct our lives if anyone cared to look. The Isdal woman cared to look. She systematically eliminated every trace, every marker, every piece of information that might identify her. This was not the behavior of someone fleeing a bad relationship or hiding from debt collectors. This was professional tradecraft, the behavior of someone trained in intelligence operations, someone who understood that even the smallest detail could compromise a mission or reveal a true identity. Yet she had also left behind a treasure trove of clues for investigators to puzzle over, perhaps more than she intended, or perhaps deliberately, as breadcrumbs for those who came after. The suitcases contained multiple wigs in different styles and colors, the tools of someone who wanted to change their appearance at will. There were brunette wigs and blonde wigs, short styles and longer ones, enough variety to transform the same woman into apparently different people on different occasions. Wigs are standard equipment for intelligence operatives, allowing them to present completely different appearances in different settings. A woman who is a brunette in one city can be a blonde in the next, making it difficult for surveillance teams to track her movements or for witnesses to provide consistent descriptions. The presence of multiple wigs confirmed what hotel staff had already suspected. The Isdal Woman changed her appearance frequently and deliberately. There were non-prescription eyeglasses with plain glass lenses, not corrective lenses, just props. Like the wigs, these glasses served no medical purpose. They existed solely to change her appearance, to create variations in her look that could confuse anyone trying to identify her. A woman wearing glasses looks different from the same woman without them. Add a different hairstyle and different clothing, and witnesses might not realize they were describing the same person. There was makeup and cosmetics, a comb and hairbrush, maps and timetables, and currency from 5 different countries. Norwegian kroner, German marks, including 5 100-mark notes hidden in the lining of one suitcase, Belgian coins, British coins, Swiss francs, and Swedish coins. This was not the currency collection of a tourist who had visited various countries and accumulated leftover coins. This was operational funding, cash in multiple currencies, allowing the bearer to pay for things without leaving a paper trail in any country she might visit. The 5 100-mark notes hidden in the lining of the suitcase are particularly significant. This was a substantial sum of money in 1970, equivalent to several $100s, carefully concealed against the possibility that her other funds might be taken or compromised. Someone had taught her to carry emergency funds in a concealed location, another piece of tradecraft that suggests professional training. An ordinary traveler keeps money in a wallet. An intelligence operative maintains hidden reserves. Even more telling was a detail that emerged later in the investigation. Some of the Norwegian banknotes found in her possession had sequential serial numbers. This meant they had come from a single source, not accumulated through normal transactions, where you would expect random serial numbers, but disbursed as a package from some central supply. Intelligence agencies typically provide their operatives with cash in just this way, drawing funds from a single source and handing them over in neat packets. There was a shopping bag from Oscar Rørtvedt's footwear store in Stavanger, a city about 120 miles south of Bergen. This bag would prove crucial. It was the thread that allowed investigators to begin unraveling the mystery of where the woman had been and who had seen her. And there was a sewing kit bearing the logo of the Hotel Regina in Geneva, suggesting the woman had stayed at one of Switzerland's finest addresses. The Hotel Regina was located on Quai Mont Blanc, directly overlooking Lake Geneva, one of the most prestigious addresses in a city known for its wealth and discretion. Switzerland has long been a hub for international intrigue, a neutral ground where operatives from all sides can meet, where bank accounts can be opened under assumed names, where the rules of the Cold War were sometimes suspended in favor of more complex arrangements. The presence of this sewing kit suggests the Isdal Woman had passed through Geneva at some point in her travels, adding another node to the network of cities she had visited. Most intriguing of all was a notepad with a single page of handwritten entries, elegant blue script consisting of letters and numbers that appeared to be some kind of code. The coded message fascinated investigators from the moment they discovered it. Here was something that seemed to confirm all their suspicions about espionage. A message written in code, found among the belongings of a woman who had traveled under false identities and disguised her appearance. What secrets did it contain? Police worked for days to crack the coded message. The technique they faced is known as abbreviation ciphering, using initial letters to represent words rather than a true encryption system. It's not sophisticated cryptography, but it's effective for concealing information from casual observers while remaining easy for the writer to create and read. When they finally succeeded in breaking the code, they discovered it was a travel log, an itinerary of the woman's movements across Europe, written in an abbreviation cipher that used initial letters to represent cities, countries, and dates. N9N 18S, for example, translated to a stay in Stavanger from the 9th to the 18th of November. O represented Oslo. B represented Bergen. P likely represented Paris. The decoded message revealed the broad outlines of an extraordinary journey. In the months before her death, the Isdal Woman had traveled extensively through Norway, Oslo, Trondheim, Stavanger, Bergen, and across Europe, including stays in Paris and Switzerland. She had made at least 2 extended trips to Norway in 1970, one in the spring and another beginning in late October, that ended with her death. The pattern of her movements was methodical rather than recreational. This was not the itinerary of a tourist seeing the sights. It was the schedule of someone with business to conduct, appointments to keep, a mission to fulfill. She moved from city to city with purpose, staying for specific periods before moving on, always using a different identity, always maintaining her cover. But the code also contained entries that investigators could not fully decipher. Some combinations of letters and numbers remained mysterious, possibly indicating meeting schedules, contact protocols, or information that required additional context to understand. The final entries were particularly cryptic. Some investigators believed they might indicate scheduled meetings on November 23rd, the last day she was seen alive, and possibly later dates that she never lived to reach. To some investigators, the coded message bore an uncanny resemblance to the one-time pads used by intelligence operatives during the Cold War. The shopping bag from Oscar Rortvet's footwear store provided investigators with their first witness who had actually interacted with the woman while she was alive. When police visited the small shop in Stavanger, they spoke with the owner's 22-year-old son, Rolf Rortvet, who remembered the woman clearly. She was a very well-dressed, nice-looking woman with dark hair, he recalled. She had a calm and quiet expression, but she was also a demanding customer who took up space, asked a lot of questions, and spent a long time making up her mind. Her English was poor, and Rortvet remembered a certain peculiar scent about her, possibly garlic, and an unusual accent he couldn't place. The woman had purchased a pair of rubber boots that matched those found at the crime scene. Using this as their starting point, police began canvassing hotels in Stavanger and soon discovered that she had checked into the Hotel St. Sviten under the name Fenella Lork, claiming to be Belgian. It was the first of many aliases that would emerge as the investigation widened. Armed with descriptions of the woman and a police sketch, investigators contacted hotels throughout Norway. What they discovered was astonishing. The Isdal Woman had stayed at numerous hotels across the country. But each time she checked in, she used a different name. The aliases accumulated: Genevieve Lancier, Claudia Tielt, Claudia Nielsen, Alexia Zarna Merchez, Vera Jarl, Elizabeth Lienhauer, Vera Schlosseneck. The only constant was her claimed nationality, Belgian. Every time she filled out a hotel registration form, she listed herself as a citizen of Belgium. But the addresses she provided, Rue Saint Hildegard 81, Philipstock Straat 44A, and others, all proved to be false when Belgian authorities investigated. The street names existed, but the specific addresses did not. The identities were elaborate fabrications, created with enough attention to detail to pass casual inspection, but falling apart under serious scrutiny. This is one of the most telling aspects of the Isdal Woman's tradecraft. A genuine Belgian citizen using a false name would have given her real address, or at least a real address in Belgium that could be verified. The fact that she gave addresses on real streets that did not actually exist at those house numbers suggests she was working from some kind of template. Perhaps a list of cover identities provided by an intelligence service, with street names taken from actual cities, but house numbers invented. The names themselves are also significant. Many of them have Catholic saint connections: Fenella, Vera, Claudia, Elizabeth. This pattern led investigators to arrange a Catholic burial for her, reasoning that someone who consistently chose saint names for her aliases was likely Catholic herself. But the pattern could also indicate something else: a systematic approach to creating cover identities, perhaps using a naming convention provided by her handlers. Intelligence services typically have established procedures for creating cover identities. An agent might be given a set of names to use, following a particular pattern so that handlers would recognize messages or contacts as genuine. The saint names could have been such a pattern, a way of signaling to contacts that this was a legitimate operative, not an imposter or someone who had stumbled upon the network by accident. Hotel staff remembered her as fashionable, elegant, and self-assured, but also guarded and nervous. These two impressions, elegance and nervousness, create a compelling portrait of someone who was skilled at maintaining her cover, but was also aware of danger, constantly alert to threats, never fully relaxing into the persona she had created. One waitress, Alvild Rangnes, who served her at the Hotel Neptune in Bergen, recalled, "My first impression of her was one of elegance and self-assuredness. In fact, I remember her winking at me. From my perspective, it felt as though she thought I had been staring a bit too much at her." This moment of playfulness, a wink from a mysterious woman to a young waitress, humanizes the Isdal woman in a way that the cold facts of the investigation cannot. She was not just a collection of aliases and coded notes. She was a person capable of humor, of connection, of the small social gestures that make us human. But other witnesses noted darker aspects of her behavior. She frequently requested room changes after checking in, moving from one room to another, perhaps seeking a room with a better view of the entrances, perhaps trying to prevent anyone from knowing exactly where she was staying. She avoided conversation whenever possible, rebuffing attempts at small talk, keeping her interactions with hotel staff strictly transactional. She seemed constantly on edge, as if expecting pursuit, one witness put it. This nervous vigilance is consistent with someone who believed they were being watched or followed. In the world of espionage, paranoia is not a mental illness, but a survival skill. an operative who relaxes, who lets down their guard, who assumes they are safe, that operative ends up dead or captured. The Isdal woman's behavior suggests someone who had internalized these lessons, who lived in a state of constant alert, who never forgot that danger could come from any direction. She spoke poor English but was fluent in German and appeared to speak French and Flemish as well. Her German was notable for certain unusual phrases that she used on hotel registration forms, phrases that suggested she might have learned the language in a particular region or from particular sources. Linguists who have analyzed her writing have suggested she may have been from the area around Nuremberg in southern Germany, or from the Franco-German border region. Conclusions that align with the isotope analysis of her teeth conducted decades later. She often changed her hairstyle and was seen wearing different wigs. Hotel staff who encountered her on different occasions sometimes failed to recognize her as the same woman, so effectively did she alter her appearance. Wigs, of course, were found in her suitcases, multiple styles and colors, the tools of someone who needed to be able to transform herself at will. Combined with the non-prescription glasses found among her belongings, these props allowed her to present a different face to the world each time she checked into a new hotel. She was also seen in the company of men on multiple occasions, observations that take on sinister significance in light of how her story ended. One waitress remembered her dining next to 2 German Navy personnel, including an officer. Was this coincidence? Or was she cultivating contacts within foreign military services, gathering intelligence that could be passed to her handlers? Other witnesses reported seeing her with 2 men near various hotels, one of them possibly in military attire. But despite extensive appeals for information, none of these men ever came forward to identify themselves or explain their connection to the woman. The silence of these men is one of the most troubling aspects of the case. If they were innocent acquaintances, fellow travelers she met in hotel bars, casual encounters with no deeper significance, why would they not come forward after her death became international news? Their silence suggests either that they had something to hide, that they had been warned to stay quiet, or that they themselves had met a fate that prevented them from speaking. At Bergen's Hotel Horrifying, the last hotel where the Isdal woman stayed before her death, staff remembered her checking out of room 407 on Monday, November 23rd. A maid overheard her speaking on the telephone in German, saying, "I'm coming soon." These 3 words, "Ich komme bald," in German, were possibly the last words the Isdal woman ever spoke that anyone recorded. They suggest an appointment, a rendezvous, someone waiting for her somewhere. Were they the words of someone planning to meet a friend, a handler, a killer? She ordered a taxi and presumably drove to the Bergen railway station, where she deposited her 2 suitcases in the luggage locker. After that, her whereabouts for the next 6 days are unknown. 6 days, 144 hours, during which she moved through the world unseen, doing whatever she was doing, meeting whoever she was meeting, until finally she ended up in that remote valley on the slopes of Ulriken. Somewhere in that gap of time, she made her way to the remote valley where her body would be found. How she got there, who was with her, what happened in those final hours. These questions have never been answered. The strange behavior, the multiple identities, the coded messages, the wigs and disguises, taken together, They painted a picture of someone engaged in clandestine activity. And in 1970, with the Cold War at its height and Norway occupying a position of strategic importance, the most obvious explanation was espionage. The espionage theory gained significant credibility when it emerged that Norwegian intelligence had been investigating the Isdal Woman independently of the Bergen police. Unknown to the local investigators, the Norwegian intelligence service had launched its own inquiry into the mysterious woman. A classified file from December 1970, later released, revealed that Norwegian Armed Forces Commander Onarheim had noted something troubling. The Isdal Woman's movements corresponded closely to the schedule of top-secret trials of the Penguin missile, a new Norwegian weapons system being tested at the time. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation, or it would have if the Bergen police had known about it. But the intelligence service kept its findings compartmentalized, sharing nothing with the local investigators who were desperately trying to identify the dead woman in the morgue. The Penguin missile was a major technological achievement for Norway, one of the first fire-and-forget anti-ship missiles in the Western world. Its development represented a significant military capability, and both NATO allies and potential adversaries would have been intensely interested in any information about its performance and capabilities. The tests were conducted in secret at various locations along the Norwegian coast, with personnel from the Norwegian Defense Research Establishment, staying at hotels in Stavanger and other cities. These were the same hotels where the Isdal Woman had registered under her false names, the same time frames, the same cities. The coincidence was too striking to ignore, though, for decades, this information remained hidden from the public and from the investigators who might have used it to understand what the woman was doing in Norway. Personnel from the Norwegian Defense Research Establishment had stayed at various hotels in Stavanger during these missile trials, the same hotels where the Isdal Woman had been registered. Was this coincidence? Or had she been sent to observe military activities, to gather intelligence on the new weapons system, to photograph installations, or recruit sources within the defense establishment? A fisherman came forward to a security officer at the Ulsnøy Naval Base in Stavanger. Notably, he did not report to the Bergen police, to say that he had seen a woman matching the Isdal Woman's description, apparently observing military movements in the area. The naval base was 130 miles from where her body was found, but if the woman was engaged in intelligence gathering, such travel would be consistent with her mission. Spies don't stay in one place. They move constantly, always staying one step ahead of surveillance, always gathering information before moving on to the next target. The possibility that the Isdal Woman was a spy would help explain many of the mysteries surrounding her death. A professional operative would know how to obtain false passports and create cover identities. Intelligence services have entire departments devoted to creating legends, the term of art for fabricated identities, complete with supporting documentation, backstories, and methods for establishing credibility. She would be trained in tradecraft, how to change her appearance, how to avoid surveillance, how to communicate in code, how to recognize if she was being followed, how to shake a tail, how to make contact with handlers without being observed. She would have access to funding from an intelligence agency, which would explain the cash from multiple countries and the expensive hotels. Intelligence operatives don't use credit cards or leave financial trails. They carry cash, often in multiple currencies, provided by their handlers. The sequential serial numbers found on the Norwegian banknotes in her possession suggested they came from a single source, possibly the disbursement office of an intelligence agency issuing operational funds. But if she was a spy, she was a spy in trouble. Her apparent nervousness, her constant movement from place to place, her request for room changes at hotels, all suggested someone who believed she was being watched, someone who feared she was being hunted. The tradecraft that might protect an operative during normal operations becomes a prison when the operation goes wrong, when the enemy has penetrated your network, when your cover is blown, and every face in the crowd might belong to someone who wants you dead. The espionage theory also helps explain the hasty closure of the case. If Norwegian intelligence knew or suspected that the Isdal Woman was connected to espionage, whether she was an enemy agent, a defector, or even an asset of Western intelligence who had been compromised, they would have strong reasons to shut down the investigation before embarrassing information came to light. Intelligence services protect their secrets above all else, and the revelation that foreign spies were operating freely in Norway, or that a Western asset had been killed on Norwegian soil, would have been deeply embarrassing to the government. This would also explain why the witness who saw the woman on Floyen Mountain was told to forget about it when he tried to report his sighting to a police contact. If intelligence services had already taken control of the investigation behind the scenes, witnesses who threatened to complicate the narrative would have been discouraged from coming forward. But the espionage theory, compelling as it is, cannot be proven, and there are alternative explanations that deserve consideration. What happened to her? There are, broadly speaking, three possibilities that investigators have considered over the decades, each supported by some evidence, each contradicted by other evidence, none proven beyond doubt. The first possibility is suicide. The official verdict, rendered on December 21, 1970, just 3 weeks after the body was discovered, was that the Isdal Woman had killed herself. According to this theory, she consumed a massive quantity of sleeping pills, made her way to the remote valley, and set herself on fire. The careful removal of identifying labels was an attempt to ensure that even in death, her true identity would remain hidden, protecting herself, perhaps, from posthumous exposure, or protecting others who might be endangered if her real name came to light. There is evidence to support this theory. The sleeping pills were found in her stomach, and additional pills were found near her body. The remote location suggested someone seeking privacy for a final act. The coded notes might have been a record she maintained for herself, not communications intended for others. The false identities might have been the tools of someone escaping from a previous life, an abusive relationship, a criminal past, a terrible secret, rather than the operational cover of a professional spy. People do commit suicide in strange ways. People do go to elaborate lengths to ensure they cannot be identified after death. People do seek out remote locations where they won't be interrupted or discovered too quickly. The suicide theory is not implausible, but there are problems with it. The sleeping pills she ingested, while numerous, had not been fully absorbed into her bloodstream when she died. The concentration was sublethal, enough to make her drowsy, but not enough to kill her. If she intended to die from an overdose, she failed, and the fire not the pills, is what actually killed her. Did she set the fire herself as a backup measure in case the pills didn't work? Or did someone else light the fire? Someone who found her unconscious from the pills and decided to finish the job. The bruising on her neck is also difficult to explain. A woman intending to kill herself with pills and fire has no reason to have been struck or strangled. The bruise could have come from a fall. Perhaps she stumbled in her drugged state, hitting her neck on a rock. But it could also have come from a blow, from hands around her throat, from violence that she did not inflict upon herself. And then there is the matter of the fire itself. Investigators found no campfire at the scene, no evidence of how the flames had been started, except for traces of petrol on her clothing and belongings. If she set herself on fire, she would have had to pour accelerant on herself and then light a match, a horrifying act that requires extraordinary determination. But the bottles that had contained the accelerant were found near her body, not in her hands. They had been placed there, arranged among the other objects in that ceremonial pattern that investigators found so disturbing. The second possibility is murder. According to this theory, the Isdal woman was killed by persons unknown, perhaps because she knew too much, because she had failed in her mission, because she had been discovered by the opposition, or because she had become a liability to her handlers. The sleeping pills may have been administered to incapacitate her, forced down her throat, or slipped into a drink. The fire was used to destroy evidence, to make identification more difficult, perhaps to send a message to others who might be tempted to betray their organizations. There is evidence to support this theory as well. The witness who saw the woman on Flóin, walking ahead of two men in coats, suggests she may have been under surveillance or escort in her final days. The men never came forward, despite extensive public appeals. Why would innocent acquaintances stay silent when a woman they knew had been found dead? The coded message in her notebook ends abruptly, as if she never had the chance to record her final movements. And the speed with which the case was closed, combined with the parallel intelligence investigation, suggests that powerful interests wanted certain questions left unasked. Murder would also explain why someone went to such lengths to remove identifying information from her belongings. A suicide victim might remove labels to protect her identity, but she would have no reason to arrange objects around her body in a ritualistic pattern after setting herself on fire. A murderer, on the other hand, might stage a scene to suggest suicide, might arrange objects to mislead investigators, might take the time to create a false narrative that would protect the real killers. The arrangement of objects at the crime scene, the watch set to 10:10 that had never been used, the umbrella, the jewelry, the bottles, struck investigators as deliberate, almost theatrical. It was not the random scatter of a woman's final moments, but something arranged, planned, meaningful. Whether that meaning was religious, as the Catholic burial suggested, symbolic, or simply intended to confuse investigators, it pointed to a level of intentionality that is difficult to square with a simple suicide. The third possibility is something in between. Assisted suicide, perhaps, or an accident that someone tried to cover up. If the woman was an intelligence operative who had been compromised, she might have chosen to take her own life rather than face capture and interrogation. Someone might have helped her carry out that decision, providing the pills and the accelerant, accompanying her to the valley, and lighting the fire after she lost consciousness. In the world of espionage, such mercy killings are not unknown. Agents who are about to be captured sometimes request that their handlers end their lives quickly rather than allow them to be tortured for information. Alternatively, the woman might have died accidentally, an overdose that was not intended to be fatal, a fall in the remote terrain, and someone who was with her decided to burn the body to destroy evidence of their involvement. This would explain the mixture of deliberate elements, the removal of labels, the arrangement of objects, and accidental elements, the sub-lethal dose of pills, the partial burning of the body. Years later, some of the police officers who worked on the original investigation admitted that none of them had truly believed the suicide verdict. One investigator, Harold Osland, could never accept that the case had been closed. His son, Tor Osland, told the BBC, "My father could never put this case away. He never could accept that they had to close down the case." The investigation had been his responsibility, and for the rest of his life, he was haunted by the questions he had been prevented from answering. Another officer's granddaughter, Cecilia Thorsted Flo, said that the case broke her grandfather's trust in his profession. Imagine dedicating your career to finding truth and delivering justice, only to have a case taken away from you before you could solve it, closed by higher authorities for reasons that were never explained. Imagine knowing that a woman lies unidentified in a cemetery, her killers, if there were killers, unpunished, her family, if she had family, never notified, all because someone decided that some secrets were more important than justice. Why was the case closed so quickly? Within 3 months of the body's discovery, Norwegian authorities had ruled it a suicide and shut down the investigation. Given the international implications, the possible espionage angle, the multiple foreign identities, the Cold War context, this haste seems remarkable. There was no shortage of leads to follow, witnesses to interview, records to examine. The case was complicated, yes, but complicated cases are solved every day by investigators who are given the time and resources to work them. Some have speculated that pressure was applied from higher up, that intelligence services wanted the case buried, that political considerations outweighed the pursuit of truth. In the Cold War era, such things happened regularly. Intelligence services routinely interfered with local police investigations when their interests were at stake. Governments covered up embarrassing incidents to preserve diplomatic relationships or protect national security secrets. And individual lives, especially the lives of expendable operatives, were often sacrificed on the altar of state interest. If the Isdal woman was a spy, her handlers might have wanted the case closed to prevent further investigation that could expose their networks. If she was an enemy agent, the government might have wanted to avoid the embarrassment of admitting that foreign intelligence services had operated freely on Norwegian soil. If she was a double agent or a defector, there might have been pressure from multiple directions to keep the truth buried. Whatever the reason, on February 5, 1971, the Isdal woman was laid to rest in Møllendal Cemetery in Bergen. The funeral was held on a cold winter day, with gray clouds hanging low over the city and the mountains shrouded in mist. The funeral was attended only by members of the Bergen police force, 16 officers who had worked on the case, who stood in the cold as a woman they had never identified was lowered into the ground. These were men who had devoted weeks and months to trying to identify her, who had followed every lead, interviewed every witness, examined every piece of evidence. They had failed. Despite all their efforts, they were burying an unknown woman in an unmarked grave, unable to notify her family, unable to bring those responsible for her death to justice. For police officers whose calling is to serve and protect, to find truth and deliver justice, this was a profound defeat. No family came to mourn her. No friends came to say goodbye. No one who had known her in life, who had laughed with her, who had shared meals with her, who had perhaps loved her, was there to see her buried. Somewhere in the world, presumably, there were people who had known her, people who might be wondering what had happened to her, people who would never learn that she had died alone in a Norwegian valley and been buried in a foreign cemetery without a name on her grave. She was buried in a zinc coffin, chosen to preserve her remains against the possibility that relatives might someday come forward or new evidence might require exhumation. Zinc is resistant to corrosion and helps preserve organic material against decay. By choosing this type of coffin, the police were thinking ahead, anticipating that technology might someday advance to the point where the woman could be identified, even decades after her death. It was an act of hope, or perhaps of professional stubbornness, a refusal to accept that this case would remain unsolved forever. Based on her use of saints' names in her aliases, Fenella, Vera, Claudia, Elizabeth, the authorities assumed she might have been Catholic and provided Catholic burial rites. It was an educated guess, an inference drawn from the patterns in her cover identities, the best they could do in the absence of any confirmed information about her religious beliefs. Her grave was left unmarked, a final anonymity for a woman who had lived her life in shadows. How could they put a name on her grave when they didn't know her name? The placeholder, Isdal Woman, was a designation for investigators and journalists, not a name that belonged on a headstone. And so she was buried without any marker, her final resting place indistinguishable from the earth around it. The ceremony was photographed, in case relatives ever came forward to claim her. The images show a bleak winter scene. A small group of men in dark coats standing around an open grave, their faces somber. In the background, the mountains of Bergen rise toward the clouds, including Ulriken, on whose slopes the woman had died just months before. It was fitting, perhaps, that she would spend eternity within sight of the place where she had met her end. She remains there today, in that zinc coffin, waiting to be identified. For 45 years, the case of the Isdal woman remained closed, officially at least. The file was sent to storage, gathering dust in police archives. The witnesses aged and died, taking their memories with them. The Cold War ended in 1991. The Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the world that had produced the Isdal woman, the world of Cold War espionage, of agents and handlers and secret missions, receded into history. New technologies emerged during those 45 years: DNA analysis, isotope testing, genetic genealogy, facial reconstruction software, technologies that would have been unimaginable to the investigators of 1970. These tools revolutionized criminal investigation, solving cases that had been cold. For decades, identifying victims who had been unknown for generations. But for most of those 45 years, No one applied these technologies to the Isdal Woman's case. She remained forgotten by officials, a footnote in Norwegian criminal history. But the mystery did not disappear entirely. It lingered in the memories of those who had worked on the case, in the imaginations of those who had heard the story, in the questions that had never been answered. The families of the original investigators remembered how the case had affected their loved ones. Journalists occasionally wrote articles about it, bringing it to the attention of new audiences. True crime enthusiasts discussed it online, speculating about possible explanations. The case became part of the folklore of Bergen, a local mystery that everyone knew about but no one could solve. Then in 2016, everything changed. In 2016, journalists from NRK, the Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation, decided to revisit the case. Working with Bergen Police and Kripos, the National Criminal Investigation Service, they began a new investigation that would bring modern forensic technology to bear on 50-year-old evidence. The Cold War was over. The secrets that had once seemed so important could perhaps now be revealed, and the technology existed to answer questions that had been unanswerable in 1970. They made an immediate discovery that highlighted how much had been overlooked in the original investigation. A rucksack containing additional personal effects from the Isdal Woman had been sitting in Bergen police headquarters since 1970, apparently overlooked or forgotten during the decades when the case was closed. Inside were a prescription bottle, a map, and other items that had never been properly examined. 45 years of evidence sitting in a storage room, waiting to be analyzed. More importantly, the original autopsy samples had been preserved. The teeth and jawbone that had been removed from the body, the tissue samples from her organs. In 1970, there had been no way to analyze these materials for DNA or trace their geographic origins. But in 2016, such analysis was not only possible, but routine. The decision to preserve these samples, made by pathologists who could not have known what future technologies would emerge, would prove crucial. Scientists conducted isotope analysis on the Isdal Woman's teeth, examining the chemical signatures left behind by the food and water she had consumed during childhood. Strontium isotope ratios in tooth enamel can indicate where a person lived during the years when their adult teeth were forming, because different regions have different geological signatures that are reflected in local food and water sources. By analyzing these ratios, scientists can often determine with remarkable precision where a person spent their early years. The results were remarkable, and they transformed investigators' understanding of who the Isdal Woman might have been. The analysis suggested that she had been born around 1930, give or take 4 years, meaning she was approximately 40 years old when she died, at the upper end of the original estimates. She had likely spent her childhood somewhere in southern Germany, possibly near Nuremberg. Around age 14, she had probably lived in the border areas of Germany, France, Luxembourg, and Belgium, regions that had been devastated by World War II and its aftermath. There were also indications that she had received dental work in multiple regions, possibly East Asia, Central Europe, Southern Europe, or South America, suggesting a life of travel that extended far beyond Europe. If these findings are correct, the Isdal Woman would have been a child during the Nazi era, growing up in Germany as the Third Reich rose to power, launched its wars of conquest, and ultimately fell to defeat. She would have been a teenager, in the chaotic aftermath of World War II, in the border regions where displaced persons wandered by the millions, and identities could be easily remade. She would have come of age as the Cold War began, as the intelligence services of East and West competed to recruit agents from the wreckage of the old order. People who had already lost everything, who had no fixed loyalties, who might be willing to work for whoever offered them security and purpose. DNA analysis provided additional clues. The Isdal woman's mitochondrial DNA places her in haplogroup H24, indicating a matrilineal line of descent originating in Southeast Europe or Southwest Asia. This doesn't tell us who she was, but it does tell us something about her ancestry, and it provides a genetic marker that could potentially be matched if the right relatives ever submit their DNA to genealogical databases. Somewhere in the world, there may be people who share this genetic lineage, whose DNA could connect them to the woman who died in Norway 54 years ago. In 2017, Interpol issued a new international notice about the Isdal woman, including her DNA profile and the updated information about her likely origins. The notice was distributed to law enforcement agencies around the world, in the hope that someone, somewhere, might recognize her or provide the crucial piece of information that would finally reveal her identity. It was a long shot, but in cold case investigation, long shots sometimes pay off. In 2018, NRK and the BBC World Service collaborated on a podcast called Death in Isdal Valley, which examined the case in unprecedented depth. The podcast featured interviews with eyewitnesses who had encountered the woman in 1970, with forensic scientists who had analyzed the evidence, and with family members of the original investigators who had never forgotten the case. It traced the investigation step by step, examined every theory, and invited listeners to contribute their own ideas and insights. The podcast brought renewed global attention to the mystery and prompted new witnesses to come forward. In 2019, a French newspaper, Le Républicain Lorrain, published an article that generated a remarkable response. A man from Forbach, in eastern France, near the German border, claimed to have had a brief relationship with the Isdal woman during the summer of 1970, just months before her death. According to this witness, the woman was a polyglot who spoke several languages fluently. She had what he described as a Balkan accent. She often dressed in ways that made her appear younger than her actual age. He had thought she was about 26, when in fact she was probably around 40. She refused to share personal details about her life or background, and she frequently received scheduled phone calls from abroad, calls that she took privately and never explained. The man became suspicious. One day, while the woman was away, he searched through her belongings. What he found confirmed his suspicions: various wigs, colorful clothes that could serve as disguises, and a photograph of the woman riding a horse. Convinced that she was involved in espionage, he considered contacting the authorities, but was afraid to do so. Instead, he kept the photograph, stealing it from her belongings before the relationship ended. Decades later, when the mystery of the Isdal woman resurfaced in the media, he finally came forward. The photograph was published in the newspaper. Is the woman in the photograph the Isdal woman? Without definitive identification, we cannot be certain. But the witness's account, if true, provides one of the few glimpses we have into who this woman might have been while she was alive. A woman of mystery, living under an assumed identity, changing her appearance, receiving cryptic communications from abroad, intimate with a man she told nothing about her real life. Another witness, who came forward in 2005 to a local newspaper, but was apparently told by a police contact to forget about it, claimed to have seen the Isdal Woman on the mountainside at Fløyen, a different mountain in the Bergen area, about 5 days before her body was discovered. According to this man, who was 26 years old in 1970, the woman was dressed inappropriately for hiking, wearing light city clothes rather than outdoor gear. She was walking ahead of 2 men in coats who looked southern. The woman appeared resigned and seemed about to say something to the witness, but did not. If this account is accurate, it suggests the Isdal Woman was not alone in her final days, that she was being followed, perhaps escorted, by 2 men who may have had something to do with her death. The fact that the witness was told to forget about it when he tried to report what he had seen adds to the suspicion that authorities wanted certain aspects of this case to remain buried. In 2023, an investigative article in the Neue Zürcher Zeitung proposed a stunning new theory that the Isdal Woman may have been connected to François Genoux, a Swiss banker with a dark past. Genoux was born in 1915 and died in 1996. During his long life, he was a Nazi sympathizer who managed finances for escaped war criminals, a supporter of Palestinian terrorist groups, and a shadowy figure who moved between the worlds of espionage, terrorism, and international finance. He had the connections and resources to provide agents with false identities and funding. He spoke French and German. He made regular trips to Belgium, where his wife was from. The theory posits that Genoux may have recruited the Isdal Woman for some kind of mission in Norway, possibly related to the country's production of heavy water, a substance used in nuclear reactors that Israel was seeking at the time for its Dimona facility. The timeline offers intriguing coincidences. In June 1970, just months before the Isdal Woman's death, Genoux met with Wadi Haddad, a leader of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, in Beirut. Could the Isdal Woman have been a Palestinian agent? An Israeli agent? A double agent caught between competing intelligence services? The theory is speculative, but it offers a framework for understanding how a woman could have obtained multiple passports, traveled so extensively, and ended up dead in a remote Norwegian valley. The truth is, we still don't know. We don't know who the Isdal Woman was. We don't know her real name, where she came from, or who her family was. We don't know why she was in Norway, or what mission she may have been carrying out. We don't know who the men were that witnesses saw her with. We don't know whether she died by her own hand or by someone else's. We don't know why the case was closed so quickly, or what Norwegian intelligence knew that they never shared with local police. After more than 5 decades of investigation, the Isdal Woman remains as mysterious as the day her body was discovered. But the search continues. Every year, forensic technology improves. DNA databases grow larger. Genealogical techniques become more sophisticated. The recent identification of the Somerton man, another Cold War-era John Doe, whose case bore striking similarities to the Isdal Woman's, demonstrates that even the oldest mysteries can eventually be solved. Somewhere in the world, there may be relatives of the Isdal Woman who don't know what happened to their mother, their aunt, their grandmother. Somewhere, there may be documents in intelligence archives that would shed light on her activities. Somewhere, there may be witnesses who saw something but never came forward, or who tried to come forward but were told to forget what they knew. The Isdal Woman was someone. She had a childhood, a family, a life before she became a corpse in a mountain valley. She spoke multiple languages, wore elegant clothes, and had a wink that stayed with a waitress for 50 years. She may have served in cause she believed in, or she may have been a pawn in games she didn't fully understand. She may have chosen her own death, or she may have been murdered by people who remain unpunished. Whatever the truth, she deserves to have her name back. If you are watching this and you have information, if you recognize something in her story, if you have family members who disappeared during the Cold War, if you know anything that might help solve this mystery, please consider coming forward. The investigation remains active. The police still want to know. And a woman buried in an unmarked grave in Bergen has been waiting 54 years for someone to tell the world who she really was. The Isdal Woman's story is in many ways a reflection of the Cold War itself, a time of secrets and shadows, when ordinary people were recruited to do extraordinary things, when identities could be erased and lives could vanish without explanation. It is a story about the price of secrecy, about the human cost of the invisible wars fought by intelligence agencies, about the lives that are sacrificed and forgotten in the name of national security. But it is also a story about persistence, about the investigators who could never put the case away, the journalists who refused to let it be forgotten, the amateur sleuths who have devoted countless hours to analyzing every detail of the evidence. It is a story about the power of modern forensic science to reach across decades and extract truth from fragmentary remains. It is a story about the hope that someday justice will be done. The Isdal Woman lies in her zinc coffin in Mollendal Cemetery, preserved against the day when technology or testimony finally reveals who she was. The mountains of Bergen rise around her, including Ulriken, on whose slopes she died. The city goes about its business, the ferries crossing the harbor, the fish market opening each morning, the tourists taking the funicular up Fløyen for the view. And somewhere, perhaps, someone knows the truth. Thank you for being here and listening to this story. If you have any information about the Isdal Woman's identity, please contact Kripos, the Norwegian National Criminal Investigation Service, or your local law enforcement agency. After 54 years, it's not too late to bring her home. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Tomorrow, we'll be back with another case that deserves to be remembered. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, everyone deserves a name. The Isdal Woman's case has become more than just a criminal mystery. It has become a symbol of the Cold War era and the countless unknown casualties of that invisible conflict. In the shadow wars between intelligence agencies, people sometimes disappeared without explanation. Some were killed by their enemies. Others were silenced by their own handlers. Some chose death over capture. Others met ends that were never meant to be discovered. The Isdal Woman, whoever she was, appears to have been caught up in this world of shadows, a world where identity was fluid, loyalty was dangerous, and death could come at any moment from any direction. Her case also illustrates the power of persistence in the pursuit of truth. For 45 years, the case was officially closed. but it was never truly forgotten. Investigators remembered it. Journalists wrote about it. True crime enthusiasts discussed it. And ordinary people wondered about the woman who had lived and died among them without ever revealing her name. This collective memory kept the case alive until technology and circumstances allowed it to be reopened. Today, the tools available to investigators are far more powerful than anything that existed in 1970. DNA analysis can link individuals to relatives they never knew they had. Isotope analysis can reveal where a person grew up based on the chemical signatures in their teeth. Facial reconstruction can create remarkably accurate images from skeletal remains. Genealogical databases contain the genetic information of millions of people, any one of whom might prove to be a distant relative of an unidentified victim. These technologies have already solved cases that were cold for decades, including the case of the Somerton man, which bore striking similarities to the Isdal Woman's and was finally resolved in 2022. There is reason to hope that the Isdal Woman's identity will eventually be discovered. Every year, more people submit DNA samples to ancestry testing services. Every year, the databases grow larger. The chances of finding a match increase. Somewhere in the world, there may be a cousin, a nephew, a great-niece, someone who carries genetic markers that connect them to the woman who died in Norway 54 years ago. When that match is found, decades of mystery may finally be resolved. But identification is only part of the story. Even if we learn the Isdal Woman's name, we may never know the full truth of what happened to her. We may never know who she worked for, what mission brought her to Norway, who killed her if she was killed, or why her death was covered up. Intelligence agencies guard their secrets jealously, and the Cold War-era operations that may have claimed her life remain classified by governments that have no interest in exposing their own dirty laundry. What we can know, what we do know, is that she was a person. She had a childhood somewhere in Germany. She grew up during the tumult of World War II. She learned multiple languages. She traveled the world under assumed identities. She experienced love and fear and hope and despair. She had a face that made waitresses stare, a wink that stayed with strangers for 50 years, an elegance that impressed everyone who met her. She was not just a mystery. She was a human being who lived and loved and suffered and died. Whoever she was, she deserves to be remembered as more than just a puzzle to be solved. She deserves to have her story told, with compassion and respect, to be mourned as a person rather, than examined as a curiosity. The mystery of her death is compelling, but the tragedy of her life, the loneliness of living under false names, the fear of whatever forces she was fleeing, the isolation of dying alone in a foreign country, that tragedy is what makes her case worth telling. The Isdal Woman lies in her zinc coffin in Mullendal Cemetery, preserved against the day when someone finally gives her back her name. The mountains of Bergen stand sentinel around her grave. The city goes about its business, year after year, decade after decade, while she waits in the earth for the truth to emerge. Someday, perhaps, someone will place a headstone on her grave, a real name, real dates, a real epitaph for a real woman. Someday, perhaps, her family will learn what happened to her, will visit her grave, will mourn her properly at last. Someday, perhaps, the full story of her life and death will be known, and the mysteries that have surrounded her for half a century will finally be resolved. Until then, she remains the Isdal Woman, a name That is not a name, a placeholder for an identity that was erased, a symbol of all the unknown dead who wait for someone to remember them. She had a name once. Someone, somewhere, knows what it was, and someday the world will know it too. The Isdal Woman had a name. Somewhere, someone knows what it was. Let's find it.